Hello and welcome to our latest topical online red hot discussion from the Festival of Thrift. My name's Simon Preston and some of you may know me from chairing previous debates and discussions for Festival of Thrift, and I also organise all of our food-based activities at our annual live event in the Tees Valley, which we very much hope and expect will return this year in September. You'll see with us we also have Jenna Johnson. There she is. Give us a wave, Jenna. Quite difficult when you're signing. Who is BSL signing and interpreting our discussion with us today. So welcome to her. Now, though you cannot see each other, only us, we do have a packed room today. We've had a really great response to this discussion. So wherever you are, thanks for joining, and you're most definitely not alone. We're all here with you. Welcome, and I really hope you enjoy this session. Now, as well as listening, your input is also really valuable, so please don't be shy. Please use the chat function and add your comments and questions to put to me, and I'll try and save at least 15 minutes at the end to put those comments to our panel. Okay, that's the tidy up done. Now let's begin. Our discussion today is entitled Roots to Better Mental Health, why reconnecting with our food can help us cope. And we've chosen it to link in with Mental Health Awareness Week, which is organised by the Mental Health Foundation. Their theme this year is nature. Why? Well, because research has shown that during the pandemic, millions of us have turned to nature to help us get through. And of course, that makes perfect sense because for most of human history, we've lived as part of nature, but over the last few generations, many, possibly most of us, have largely withdrawn, not always voluntarily, from that closeness. So in this discussion, we're focusing on food as part of nature. We'll aim to find out why returning to that closeness, I was just talking about, perhaps through growing the food we eat, but also cooking, sharing, and savouring it can be an effective coping strategy. Okay, so I've said hello to Jenna and to all of you. So let's welcome our 4 inspirational speakers today to our Roots to Better Mental Health discussion. In no particular order, give us a wave when I introduce you. Jamie Sadler, there he is Director of Men's Pie Club. It's a Movember Foundation funded initiative, Newcastle based, and it has been developed to increase social connections and feelings of belongingness for men at risk of becoming socially isolated. We also have Beth Smith. Beth, give us a wave. She's sitting there in Redcar with a sea view, apparently, lucky her. She's project manager at Redcar's Palace Hub, which actually also happens to be a Festival of Thrift's spiritual and actual home. And her project, Blooming Youth Collective, which you can find on Instagram or Facebook, is a brand new initiative with food growing at its core, bringing young people together to tackle social isolation and to improve mental health. Now, many of you are expecting to see Chrissy Kelly today. Sadly, Chrissy Kelly is unwell. So I'm very happy to say that Dacre Burgess-Watson has agreed to stand in last minute. Now, Dacre is very much involved with Absent. That's spelled ABSCENT, which is the organisation that Chrissy founded, and which is an organisation which helps to advise and inform people who have lost their sense of smell. A very topical issue because that is something very much linked with COVID. But Dacre is very much involved in that, but Dacre in her own right is the co-director of the Altered Eating Research Network, in the medical sciences section at the Newcastle University. So I know Altered Eating and Absent work closely together, Dacre. Lastly, we have Dr. Vincent Deary. He's Professor of Applied Psychology at Northumbria University. There he is, which all sounds very dry. You can already tell he's not very dry. He's anything but. His research has led him to focus on the importance of pleasure, including from nature and food, in maintaining good mental health. Is that fair enough, Vincent? Now, I said to Vincent before, I was loving the background to his Zoom picture today. Apparently, those are the notes for his new book, which is about to come out. So in some ways, you're getting a sneak preview today. So welcome all. I'm just going to ask you next to take over from me. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organisations, a couple of minutes before I take over. So Jamie, you start. In a couple of minutes, tell us what you do at Men's Pie Club.
Afternoon, everyone. So yeah, Men's Pie Club, it's a relatively new project. It's been going 2 or 3 years now, and we're in the process of piloting it, basically seeing if it does what Simon just described. Ultimately, our overall goal is to improve men's mental health and well-being through increased social connectivity. And basically to do that, to bring chaps together, we're using food and cooking, namely pies, to try and create those strong social networks for those at risk of social isolation and loneliness and any risk factors such as depression, anxiety, connected with that. It's a Movember funded piece of work. So we work very, very closely with the Movember Foundation. And it's in response to some of the research that they've done over the years, that there's a big issue with chaps in their middle kind of years becoming less socially connected. We're not very good, as guys, at keeping up those social connections. So we wanted to come up with an innovative, fresh, kind of new way using food, which we're very passionate about, to try and tackle that issue. So we're in the process of piloting it, like I say, over the next year. And hopefully we're on the start of a really exciting journey to try and get men's pie clubs popping up in communities across the UK and possibly even abroad as well, given that Movember work very, very much in Australia, Canada, North America, and what have you. So yeah, we're at the start of an exciting journey.
Thanks, Jamie. Whenever you mention Men's Pie Club, people's eyebrows go up. It's a lovely idea. It's got a ring to it. It might seem like a silly question, but why pies? Why did you pick on pies? I
think obviously I wanted to think of something which men liked, and I know guys that don't like football. I know guys that don't like cricket. I know guys that don't necessarily like going to the cinema. But I don't know many guys that don't like a good old pie. Mm-hmm. And so having that humor and just moving away from a statutory kind of mental health service as well, I think was really important. So bringing that element of kind of fun into Pie Club was really important, because I want that fun, the pie, to help us break down those barriers of trying to encourage guys who are struggling to come together.
Yeah, interesting that you could have picked sport or something like that, but food and pies was the unifying thing. You've said that the project is in a trial phase at the moment, seeing what works. But given what you've learned so far, where do you hope to be with the pie clubs in, say, 5 years?
In 5 years. So first of all, of the next year, we've got to make sure that we've got 5 or 6 pie clubs up and running with regular members. And during that time, we're spending a lot of effort on evaluating the impact. So we're working with academics as well as doing our own kind of qualitative research, just to kind of prove that it is having that impact that we hope it does. At the same time, the big job for me over the next year is writing a men's pie club Bible, if you like, a toolkit, which has got everything you need to know in terms of how to set up a pie club in your community. Because we really want to work in partnership with people, with organizations who want to set up pie clubs anywhere in the world. So by putting all of that effort into that toolkit and getting that blueprint, we're hopeful, that in 5 years' time, we can have that presence both wider in the Northeast, UK, but also abroad as well.
Wow, brilliant. It's a fascinating project. It's easy to find online for anybody who'd like to look up more. And I did spot there's also a video I know that Movember Foundation made of the progress so far, which is only a couple of minutes, but it's so powerful and very moving. So I'd urge anyone to go and watch that. I'm going to move on to you, Beth, and ask about you. Now, I know you've only recently set up the Blooming Youth Collective in Redcar. But even so, tell us a little bit about what you've managed to get done so far and what you dream of achieving.
So right now we're sort of, it's like a virtual sort of thing at the minute because we can't open until next Tuesday in the space downstairs. We're based in the hub on the seafront in Redcar, near Pasitos, if you know Pasitos. And we're basically a project which works to, it's young people led, and we work to help increase social action within young people and help decrease social isolation. And we basically use nature, gardening, crafting, activism to encourage young people to be more socially aware and to reach out and give that sort of safe space to people that might not have that accessible to them already right now, especially in the Northeast in general, but also specifically in Redcar and Cleveland. So basically it sort of was born out of basically because of COVID, the social isolation that young people faced. It's always been quite a big issue, but especially because of COVID, you not being able to leave the house that often. It was basically born out of that, and it's quite personal to me as well.
Yeah. The second part of my question there, Beth, was about where, I know it's early days, where do you want to be with it in a year's time? Where do you dream that it will take you to?
Well, we're hoping to have a sort of community allotment eventually, and people being aware of what the space is, and being able to feel comfortable to come and just sit. We have free tea and coffee and sofas and crafts and hopefully workshops. We're really wanting to reach out to local groups to come in and do workshops, because I think that that's important, especially to tie in the locality of everything. Because
well, good luck with that. I mean, I know you're very young yourself, but you're into growing. But I know we still associate growing with older people, really. You know, I think that's something that lots of organisations are struggling with. How hard have you found it to engage young people in growing?
I think it's difficult because if people aren't interested in it, or they don't know that they are, it's difficult to spark that, because if they've never had the opportunity and it's never been accessible to them, then they're not gonna know. And I think it's overlooked in young people, gardening, but just in general, like nature and just enjoying it. And it's understandable why it's not like there's that many opportunities for that to grow. So like where I grew up in quite a small village, and we had an allotment from when I was like 4. So that was always accessible to me. And that's why it sort of was sparked inside of me that I actually really enjoy being outside and growing.
I mean, you told me when we spoke earlier, Beth, that you grew up in the countryside. Is this very important in urban areas more so than in rural areas to have these kind of initiatives, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, because it's not, there aren't that many areas, even though they're bigger areas, they don't have as much green space because they are bigger urban areas. So like I was at uni for 3 years down in the Midlands in Coventry, and Coventry was not that green. And I really struggled because there wasn't anywhere to go. So I'm sort of wanting to create that, and we're sort of wanting to create that in an urban environment. And it's sort of like a weird juxtaposition between Redcar High Street and our space, and we're wanting to make it as welcoming as possible.
Thanks, Beth. It's really fantastic. Dacre, I'm going to come to you next, if you want to turn your microphone on. There we go. Dacre, again, thank you for stepping in for Chrissy, who was the founder of Absent, and I know that you work closely with Chrissy. I know an organisation that supports people who've lost their sense of smell will be quite a revelation to many people. It's not something that we actually hear much about. Could you tell us a little bit about the organisation and how it came to be set up and sort of what's happened since? And I guess take us into the real present, because I know Absent has had this huge influx of members. I don't know if that's the word, because of the link with loss of smell due to COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So Chrissy was herself a sufferer of a smell loss, which happened to her many years ago, and she found it so troubling, and realised that there was so little support for people experiencing this, that she set up Absent as a charity to support people with smell loss. So before COVID hit, I think they had about 1,000 members, but then now they've got 3 different Facebook groups, which they have around 40,000 members have joined since COVID. But Chrissy's been a lot in the press internationally for a lot of her really innovative work in developing what's called smell training for people with smell loss. But to go back a little bit, part of the thing about smell loss is people don't really realise how important our sense of smell is to our experience of food, to our engagement with the world, to our intimacy with other people. Smell largely drives our experience of food flavour. We tend to think of taste, but actually the mouth takes all the credit because that's where the physical action is. But actually, if you hold your nose and try and eat a meal with you, or put a nose clip on, you don't get a lot of pleasure out of food. So a vast amount of the pleasure from food comes from the smelling of it. So this is really what Absent was set up to help with. And we at Alternating Research Network recognise the importance of smell to food and eating as well. And we've been working in this area with people with a whole range of different eating difficulties. And we've come to understand the importance of smell too, but also particularly the importance of smell to mental health, which is the topic of this.
Yeah.
So I think we don't really realise the importance of our noses very much, but it is the only part of our physiology that is direct, or the only part of our brain. We have cranial nerves that hang down inside our faces here, and it's the only bit of our brain that's actually connected to the environment. So we get a lot of signalling from all of those smells that are coming towards us. So if you lose that, it can have really devastating impacts on your mental well-being and your ability to eat. So really important, the sense of smell.
Yeah, when I initially spoke with Chrissy, she told me exactly that, Dacre, this idea that, well, that it's a very basic thing, that the smell, the nose and the brain are actually physically connected. The brain drops down into the back of the nose. So it's that stronger link. How it's hard for many of us to imagine what it must be like to lose our sense of smell, and with it much of our sense of taste too. And I know this link between sensing the world, the natural world, through smell and our mental health. You can imagine that it would just be such an upsetting and horrific thing to go through, that would have the impact. How do people cope with losing their sense of smell? What is the impact?
There's a direct impact, we have discovered, between the sense of smell and depression. So we know we have this thing that's sort of round about here, the olfactory bulb, which is what transmits a lot of the chemical messages of smells into the brain. And they've found in research that the size of your olfactory bulb is directly linked to the severity of depression. So, and it works both ways. So if you're depressed, they find that your olfactory bulb can shrink in size. And if you train your sense of smell, you can actually grow your olfactory bulb, which is phenomenal, isn't it? So there is a direct relationship between the ability to smell and physiologically to depression as well. So that's quite a fascinating new discovery, I think, which means, and this is what Chrissy does so well, is she helps people smell training. So you actually learn how to be a better smeller when you work with Chrissy and Absent.
I think I'd like to come back to that with you a little bit later, Dacre, but I'm going to move on and talk with Vincent. Vincent, welcome. So Vincent, I know that you've done a lot of research, a lot of published work, but you didn't initially start off with food being your main focus. How did the research you've done lead you to this interest you have now in food, pleasure and mental health?
So I'd always been working with people primarily as a clinician, actually. I only became an academic relatively late in life, with people with long-term conditions, particularly long-term fatiguing conditions. So I still hold a clinical post. I still work in the NHS half a day a week. And I work in a fatigue clinic where we see people with autoimmune conditions, people post-cancer. Fatigue post-cancer is a big issue. People with liver disease, anything that causes you to have really low energy can bring you to our clinic. And one of the things that I help people to do is to re-engage with life with their symptoms and try and get the best quality of life they can with limited resources. And one of the things you realize when your energy goes low, you tend to spend it on the needful things. So a lot of people, their energy goes into work, it goes into housework, and they stop investing in pleasure. And the more you stop investing in stuff that actually feeds your spirit and feeds your soul, the more your energy and your mood goes down. So I work with people to help them kind of re-engage with joy. So one of the nice bits of my job is actually prescribing joy. It's saying, you know, go to the stuff that feeds you. And then working initially with head and neck cancer patients to talk about fatigue, one of the things that became obvious is when you got people who had survived head and neck cancer, they were often in remission. If you got them together to talk about anything, be it fatigue, be it, you know, managing day-to-day life, they would always come back to food. And this is where Dacre and I ended up working together. We ended up getting people with head and neck cancer who had got really severe physiological problems with eating. We got them together in a kitchen and started playing with food. And what became really, really clear was that existing medical interventions for them, they were all about nutrition, they were all about calories, they were all about diet. There was nothing that acknowledged the central role that food has to pleasure and connection. Because I think appropriately today, I think yesterday and today is Eid. So it's a festival, and we're in the festival of thrift. And if you think of the origin of both the word Eid and the word festival, they're about feasting. They're about coming together around food. They're about what Jamie's doing with the pies. So food is much more than nutrition. Food is joy, food is connection, food is pleasure. And that's what was completely missing in the discourse around the people with head and neck cancer. So that's why I've got really interested, both clinically and from the research point of view, of food as a source of pleasure and connection. And when it goes missing, your well-being just plummets.
I love the idea of you traveling the country prescribing joy to us all, Vincent. We need more of that. Maybe you need to have you at our festival, you know, traveling around, giving everyone some joy. I said earlier on that the Mental Health Foundation chose nature as their theme this year, and that's very much linked to what's happened to us all during the pandemic. I imagine you'll have been very much at the centre of that. I mean, were they right to focus on nature for their theme this year? And what has been your experience of, I guess, how the pandemic has impacted on those who already had mental health problems and those who didn't? You know, have those people sort of a better understanding of each other now?
Well, yeah, I am going to draw mainly on my experience of working with people in the clinic who are often people dealing with long-term physical issues. And it was odd, and it wasn't just me that noticed this. All my colleagues working with people with long-term conditions, they all noticed that a fair proportion of them actually said, we feel better during lockdown. And digging into that a little bit, it was, well, several of them used the same phrase. They said, welcome to my world. For the last 10 years, I've had to stay indoors. I've had very limited resources. I've had to just walk in my locality. I've not been able to connect with other people. So they suddenly felt less alone in being alone. And so there was also a sense that other people around them were beginning to get what their experience was like on a day-to-day basis. But I think there were other more sort of positive attributes of that. But one of the things I've been writing about in the new book is that we're very much creatures of rhythm. And the modern world, and particularly our engagement with employment and media, it's quite a relentless rhythm. And physiologically, we suffer from that. It wears us down, it wears us out, it lowers our mood. And I think what lockdown gave some of us permission to do, and particularly people struggling with illness, it gave them permission to stop. It gave them permission to slow down. It gave them permission to miss out on stuff and not to keep up with stuff. And I think that's been hugely important. I've seen it in colleagues as well. I've seen several of my colleagues say they're not going to go back to this relentless round of meetings and conferences and pushing themselves, that they're now going to give themselves permission to slow down. So I definitely think there's some stuff we can learn about well-being from what's happened. And to go back to your question, what I've heard a lot of people say, myself included, is that we have reconnected with our locality. I now appreciate the park, which is literally 5 minutes down the bottom of my road. This is going to sound ridiculous, but it was so beautiful the other day, I actually cried. Now, I've never gone to my local park and cried before, but it was just this effusion of joy, colour and beauty. And I have never stopped or had the opportunity to enjoy that like I have recently. So yeah, I think there's something about all our worlds becoming a little smaller that has actually enabled some of us who are lucky enough to have some nice sensory experiences within easy reach. I think it's enabled well-being.
Thanks, Vincent. Thank you for that. So that was just wonderful to speak to you all, and we've all met you now, which is lovely. So I'll take the moment to remind everybody that you can respond to what you've just heard with your own questions. Do pop those in the chat function, and we'll look at those and make sure we get to some of them towards the end. But I mean, I would say that actually most of the people on the screen haven't met each other before today either, or don't not work together. So having listened to quite a lot of science there from Dacre and Vincent, I wonder really whether Beth and Jamie would like to respond to that. Beth, I'll come to you first. Were the things that Dacre and Vincent said there you found particularly interesting with the experience you've already had thus far, thinking about, you know, this sort of very physical impact of the senses and nature, growing and food?
Yeah, I think it really is just really important to have that, because for many they don't have that, and their lives did sort of completely change. I mean, all of our lives completely changed, but for some people more than others. So like even personally, I was at uni when COVID first happened, and then I ended up coming back. And being back in the space, and I'd usually go and spend time and do things and be out all of the time with my friends, but I couldn't do that, and I had nobody was here for me to spend time with, so I had to pretty much learn how to enjoy being outside by myself. And that was when I sort of it was trying to find something that was fulfilling, to give me some sort of purpose. And I think that a lot of people's purpose is their jobs and their friends and going places and doing things. And when that stopped, and when we couldn't do that, a lot of people really struggled, because there was nothing. Whereas with like growing, and I say that when the plants and when everything started growing, I was growing with it. I know that sounds really cheesy, but it was just really important for me, because it was it was something other than myself that I was responsible for, that I it was something other than me. And I think to spark that in other young people is really important.
I think that's really important, Beth, and not cheesy at all. I think we've heard a very different perspective there. And, you know, Dacre was talking a bit about the physical connection within our actual heads, and Vincent gave his perspective, but yours has been very much about this kind of relationship with something wonderful growing in front of you. I want to make sure we include the cooking and sharing, Jamie, so I'm going to come to you. How much is of the sort of the science and the theory that the Dacre and Vincent have talked about have, you know, are in your mind when you're running your pie clubs?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly in our mind, definitely. I mean, I think the thing with Pie Club is we obviously try and keep it really, really simple. We know from research out there that food and social interaction are really deeply intertwined, and that, you know, people who are socially isolated or lonely, there is loads of research out there that leads to reduced appetite, lower food intake, reduced physical activity. People are at risk of increased undernutrition as well, lower fruit and vegetable intake. So from a nutritional point of view, being socially isolated, you know, can be really, really detrimental, which is obviously a big worry. And I think what's, you know, really, really sad, and something that we've seen over the last few months with COVID, is that that's all been exacerbated because people are much more socially isolated, more lonely. I mean, just in the space of 30 minutes since, you know, we started this call, I've seen my email popping up with 3 referrals for Pie Club, 3 new members, and I'm quite literally getting referrals on a daily basis because people are really, really struggling. So yeah, we're going to be busy.
Sounds like it. Dacre, I'm going to come to you to tell you about something that happens with Beth. Actually, Beth and I had a video call a couple of weeks back, and she was showing me some of the things she was growing, and she brushed past the tomato plants and you could see her face change, and she was talking about the smell, but you know, her whole body language changed. Is that right, Beth? Yeah. So what's that about? You know, how, you know, with growing in food, what is this connection between the smells and the sense of, you know, something that touches us on a deeper level that, you know, I guess feeds through to our emotions? Where's that coming from?
Yeah, there's some really interesting things about smell that's not equivalent of taste. So first of all, I have to make a distinction between smell and taste, because we use this word taste to describe our experience of food and everything. But actually, taste is sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami, what happens in the tongue. And I said before that we tend to confuse our experience of what's happening sensorially with what happens in our mouth, when actually smell largely governs a lot of these things. But the interesting thing about smell is that it's this cascade of different processes that goes all the way to our very big orbitofrontal cortex, to the big front part of our brains. And there's a lot of really interesting processing work that goes on. But smell, unlike other senses, goes straight into the part of our brain that deals with emotion and memory. So if you think about, for example, you might have found this, Beth, that sometimes if you get a really strong smell that just, you smell it from somewhere, it will trigger an emotion in you that will often be a really positive emotion, and often from childhood when a lot of those positive emotions are formed.
Yeah, that was exactly what happened. It was basically, tomatoes remind me of my childhood and growing up and having my greenhouse, and it just reminds me of my grandparents and my great grandma and just my mum, and just happy memories of my greenhouse. And that's what tomatoes remind me of, not like tomato sauce.
You're absolutely right about that. And there's really good evidence that some of the most powerful and positive emotional memories that we have come from or are triggered by those incredible smells that we get when we're doing something like gardening. So I was thinking actually, Simon, in relation to the idea of Japanese forest bathing. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, the Shirin-yoku. So there's this wonderful a guy who's written a book about forest bathing. So this is a big practice in Japan where you literally go out and sit with nature and breathe in the air and all that sort of thing. And he says in his book that indoors we tend only to use a couple of our senses, and mostly our eyes and our ears, which is what we're kind of saturated with within urban environments. But outside, he says, we can smell the flowers, taste the fresh air, look at the changing colours of the trees, hear the birds singing, and feel the breeze on our skin. So this sort of complete sensory experience that can be so uplifting, drawing on all of those positive emotional memories from our childhood. And it all gets triggered by this wonderful sensory interaction that we have in nature.
Vincent, I'm just actually quite briefly, can I ask you to maybe come in on that? Because just give us some of the psychology of it. In the work that you do, how much is this a factor, you know, this emotional connection between nature, smells, food, senses, and our emotional well-being?
Well, one of the revolutions or shifts, let's be less dramatic, in psychology over the last 10, 15 years, probably 20, is we've realized that we're not a kind of isolated brain in a vat. We're not a kind of Cartesian mind kind of stuck in a body. We are our body, we're embodied, and our bodies are embedded in an environment which is extended and enacted. So they often call 4E cognition: embodied, embedded, extended, and enacted. So this idea that, you know, the senses are this kind of small passage to the world that we occasionally tune into is nonsense. We're primarily sensual beings, and I think that there's a lot about the rhythms of modern world that cover that up. And I think getting back into nature, it reminds us that we're primarily sensual, embodied beings. So, of course, I mean, sometimes this stuff is so obvious that when I say it in the clinic to a client, I kind of think, is this too obvious? But we all forget that a lot of our pleasures come from the senses, from connection, from food, from being in nature, from touching other people, from smelling our loved ones. It's really basic stuff, but it's stuff that you see go out the window when people have got long-term conditions, or stuff that gets disrupted. So yeah, I think it's as simple as that, really, Simon. We're embodied creatures.
Thank you so much, Vincent. Jamie, when I was asking you before why pies, kind of, you know, I totally understood your answer, but it's pies, isn't it? You know, it's just like we all just love the smell of a pie. And it does make us feel, there's something about a pie that makes us feel warm and happy. Well, most of us, I presume everyone's like me. Do you get that? Do you get that in the pie club? This kind of, like, do people open up and talk about how the aromas of cooking pies together takes them back? And, you know, I guess the worry would be, is that always to a good place, or can actually it take us back to a not good place?
Yeah, I mean, at each pie club, so the guys are responsible for deciding what pie they're going to cook that week. So they plan a week in advance. That discussion amongst the groups is really interesting to be part of, actually, because there is some reminiscing and talking about childhood recipes, and I love listening to the guys, you know, talk about that. And then when they come together, you know, there's kind of two elements to the making the pies. The first element is baking the pastry. And so again, taking 10 minutes to rub the butter into the flour. It's quite a gentle mindfulness kind of activity. And the conversation, you know, between the group is really nice. Pastry made in the fridge, and then they move on to the filling as well. So I think the whole process of pie club, you know, once they come in and start, you know, getting their hands dirty, if you like, with the food, you see the shoulders drop, which is nice. Everyone's doing the same thing. They're in a safe space, and I think you know, one of the aims of pie club, well, one of the key goals is to increase social connections, right? That's really important. But one of the things that I'm determined to ensure is that their time in pie club is, you know, it's all about the quality of that experience, and just making sure that it's, you know, the best possible quality, that they get so much out of it. So yes, increasing their connections, but making sure that they're the best possible connections, experiences there can be. Oh, you're on mute, Simon.
I'm okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jamie. I mean, you can see from my face earlier on, as soon as I get talking about food, I sort of come alive. So there's, you know, there's no doubt that I really get this connection between food and sharing food. But I do grow food as well, and I do enjoy growing food, but I don't understand why I like doing it. And Beth very beautifully before described, you know, her relationship with the things she's growing, perhaps better than me. What, you know, yes, fine, all this lovely smells and so on, but what about the green stuff and the brown stuff, the soil? Is there any reason why touching soil has a positive impact on us, to anybody? Dacre, you're nodding furiously. Do you want to
I'm nodding because my favourite word in the English language is petrichor. Do you know the word petrichor? The smell of the soil after rain. And it's produced by the bacteria in the soil, and they produce this chemical called geosmin. And in fact, Chrissy and I were talking about this recently, that we want to package geosmin up and send it out to people to smell, because there is something about the smell of being outside for me that is wonderful as well. So gardening, the whole thing of being outdoors and gardening, when you're playing with the soil, that the soil itself has this invigorating aroma that is just really wonderful. And that there has been some really interesting research done on this in terms of what the smell of the soil can do for your mental health. So I can't say that I'm completely on top of that research, but certainly a lot of people are looking at geosmin and its impact on mental health and well-being and what it does. So I suspect there is probably actually another chemical link there that we haven't fully explored at this point. So yes, geosmin and petrichor, that's a great word to know. The petrichor. It's just a lovely word.
Well, for people like me who like an answer, you know, there's a great answer as to why we like getting fingers in the soil. Beth, I don't know if that's also interesting to you, is it, as someone who's currently, you know, elbow deep in compost half the day?
Yeah, I really am. And it's enjoying it, like the soil itself, but also like having the time with other people and getting to be involved in that sort of environment. And also I think seeing it gives you some sort of perspective, putting time and effort into growing and having something go from a little seed that is literally like a millimetre big into something that you can eat and make into a meal. And it puts it into perspective for people, and I think it helps like people value their food more, because a lot of the times people are detached from food and detached from where they get it and what they make with it. And I think that for a lot of people that's understandable, because time is important for most people, that they can't afford time-wise or monetary-wise to grow from seed to create vegetables and fruit and stuff. But to have that experience I think helps value food more. And also I hate food waste now. If there's something that I can make into a soup or just anything, I'd hate to get rid of it. And worst comes to worst, we compost. So, and I love composting. It's like, it's really grim, but at the same time, it's like waste that would be going somewhere else can be made into something that's really good again for your vegetables. So it's like, you just come full circle.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we're all applauding you at home, Beth, for your evangelizing about food waste and composting. And you could lead us on into a whole different discussion there. Beth, I'm going to come back to you in just a sec, but just to say, don't forget you can leave your questions with the chat function, and I'll put them forward. Not so many so far, but maybe you just love my questions and that's the reason why, and I'm more than happy to keep on going, which I'm going to do right now. Jamie, before, I think it was you mentioned mindfulness, I think, what you were talking about, which reminded me I wanted to talk about that. Beth, I mean, certainly mindfulness is something that's all over schools and young people right now. It's something that my son, who's younger than you, gets every week, I think now. Is it something that was a big thing for you in school? I'm focused on you because you're by far our youngest contributor. And is it something you think about in terms of your group? You know, is there a connection between mindfulness and connectedness with the project that you're running?
Yeah, we try to encourage people to be as mindful, if that's like for their own like well-being, but also for the group and what we do, because I think it's just as beneficial in including that in just every single thing that we do is as valuable as any other thing that we'd be incorporating, such as like the different workshops that we have, and professionals coming in, just incorporating that, I think, into everyday things that you do, such as like cooking, or I don't know, watering the plants. It really is just really therapeutic, and having a space to do that is therapeutic, and giving the opportunities to people, especially young people. I think the isolation of young people is really quite overlooked and misunderstood, and hence why mental health problems within young people are also misunderstood. I think for a lot of people, isolation is at the core of that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Vincent, can I pick up with you on that? We're just sticking with mindfulness. Is mindfulness something that you talk about much with your patients? And
yeah, my internet is suddenly a bit terrible, so make some kind of signal if you can't hear me. But mindfulness, I think sometimes when we prescribe mindfulness as this practice that people have to do, it becomes another thing that people think they're getting wrong. It's like, oh, I'm not doing it properly. And it becomes another responsibility for people who are already overburdened with responsibility. And I think we need to demystify it a bit. Mindfulness is just being in the present moment, doing what you're doing. So it can be making a pie, it can be gardening, it can be writing, it can, whatever your activity is, it's just be present to the activity that you're doing. And that is essential, I think, because we know, for instance, that worry and rumination are about the past and the future, and they contribute majorly to low moods. So actually just devoting your attention and your energy to doing what you're doing, for me, that is the kind of mindfulness, again, as an embodied thing. And maybe that is part of the issue with when we talk about mindfulness. We think of it as a cerebral activity rather than an activity of our whole being. And I think that that's what Beth is describing. That's what Jamie's describing. They're describing this where your activity, your connection, you're doing what you're doing, and even better if that's also with other people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for mindfulness, we often get told, don't we, to focus inwards and focus on our breathing and our internal self, rather than, as you say, being present in the things we're doing.
Yeah, and it's an observation that several of my clients have said to me, because we often do talk about mindfulness as a way of switching off, of kind of going into recovery and rest mode. But for some people whose bodies are problematic, if they've got pain, if they've got fatigue, actually focusing on their body can be quite aversive. So actually for them, focusing on the broader environment, on sounds, on colour, that's actually much more healing than this, like you said, this kind of inward focus. So yeah, I think you just need to find the form of mindfulness that works for you.
Yeah. I think that what that makes me think of is the times during lockdown when we've actually had some quiet and we could hear the sounds of nature. I think perhaps one of the problems we have in our towns and cities is that there's so much urban noise. It's actually quite difficult to focus on the sounds of nature. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just we all need to slow down a bit, and I think lockdown helped us do that a little bit. I mean, interestingly, I see a lot of people I'm working with in the clinic, and again, a lot of colleagues and friends, there's actually more anxiety about coming out of lockdown. It's because in some ways we've got used to this quite small world, and I think we need to be gentle with ourselves in this transition. It's quite a big transition, and I think we need to remain gentle and keep the pace slow.
Okay. Thank you, Vincent. I want to come back actually to you, Dacre, just fairly briefly, but I think all of our speakers have got us all really excited about being more present, being more connected, using our senses in a really positive way to connect with nature and food. And you did tantalizingly say towards the beginning of this discussion that we could improve our sense of smell and improve our, so can you give us a few hot tips on how we might do that?
Well, mindfulness is one of them. I mean, obviously we're surrounded by smells all the time, so becoming mindful of them is one way that you can do it. So you can do it just by thinking a little bit more about it and noticing the smells, but you can actively train your sense of smell by sniffing things in the morning and sniffing things in the evening, twice a day, just for a little while. And you don't do this without the pictures. So you're not trying to trick yourself, but simply by picking up a lemon and looking at it and going, I'm going to smell a lemon now, and sniffing it. That in itself is a form of smell training. You can smell train with anything. You can get a proper kit if you want one from Absent, but you could also do this on your own just by being more mindful. And what we find is that this has a demonstrable impact. So if you think about people who are in the wine industry or people who are professional perfumers, they develop their sense of smell quite explicitly working on it. And we can do that as well. And it doesn't take any great equipment or knowledge to learn how to do smell training, but noticing is one of the biggest things that you can do for smell training. But if you want any more information on the proper smell training, you can go to absent.org, and there's lots of information there. That's
great. I think we should all do that, and we should all open our fridges and pick a few things out and give them a good sniff.
Yeah.
Jamie, sort of my final question, really. Oh, actually, I just wanted to say, first of all, there was a comment in the comments box just regarding somebody else has got equally excited as me about the geosmin, and commented that, you know, it makes us all think about getting dirty and mud pies and playing with mud and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think yeah, we need to all be a bit less clean as well, don't we? Perhaps that could also really help us all. But Jamie, I was going to come to you. I guess, you know, you and Beth particularly work very much at the forefront with groups. So for those of us who maybe are not going to join a men's pie club, or for Beth, a growing collective, what have you learned that you can give to us in terms of how you feel we can all use food and growing to improve our mental health? Any sort of pointers that you would say, well, this is...
Yeah, well, cooking and eating together, you know, I mean, there was a saying that we used to use in the restaurant, Simon, at Harissa. We used to say, you know, sharing food tastes better, and it's true, right? And I think to add to that, sharing food is better for your health, and there is research out there. So, you know, again, just sitting down together as a family around the table, it's, you know, one of the simplest ways that you can do it, which unfortunately is sometimes lost these days. I think is, yeah, really, really important. I think there's some really interesting research out there that says that eating with someone in the evening makes you feel closer to them than eating with somebody at midday, which is really, really interesting. So thinking about the time of day as well, and just, you know, eating together, laughing, reminiscing, having the odd tipple as well always helps. So yeah, I think they're some of the basic things.
Thank you, Jamie. Beth, any good advice from what you've learned so far in terms of how we can get our green fingers going and improve our mental health through growing?
Yeah, I think just in general, sort of touching on what Vincent said, about challenging the societal expectations of being constantly busy and always doing things that might not be good for you, and instead taking up things that actually in your spare time could and probably are better for you in general, because I think there's very much just an expectation now to be busy all the time, and I think it's just as important to not be busy and to leave time to actually just not be busy and not have plans, and if it's raining outside, to maybe just listen to the rain, or if it's sunny outside, going and sitting in the sun. And I think just like the little things that you can do. So like, even if you're commuting, like I get the bus to work every day. And I've started to now, instead of sitting and going through my emails, I sit and look out the window and I'm like, wow, there's so much that you just miss by not being present. And through just the simple things of like picking out the fruit and veg, or seeing where you can find brambles in just the most weird places. In the centre of like, there's some in Saltburn by the trains, and just walking by and being like, I could just eat that if I wanted to, and just staying within the moment, and with other people sometimes, because that's just as good.
Lovely, thank you so much, Beth. Really nice. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll give Vincent and Dacre a minute each to perhaps, or however long you want, less than that if you want, but just a final few words on, you know, Dacre, you go first in terms of what you would like to impart in terms of where you think people can really make the best impact on their mental health by connecting with food.
I think getting out of your head sometimes and getting into your feelings and your all of your senses, engaging all of your senses a little more than perhaps you did more consciously, is a really great thing to do for mental health. So I think the last thing I would leave you with is that the word yugen, which is a Japanese word, because I love giving people words, which is the sense of the beauty and mystery of the universe. Is to develop that yugen sense, and that is probably for me one of the most useful things to think about in terms of mental health.
Yeah, you've given us some lovely words, Dacre. Or when Beth said before about the rain coming down, I thought, well, immediately we need to go outside and smell the soil now, don't we? That's what we need to do. Never mind staying inside. Vincent, last word to you. Could you give us a few words of wisdom on you know, the kind of advice you give to all of us?
I don't think I can really improve on everything Beth said. Actually, it really resonated with me, and it's going for the joy in the present moment, and it's often there if you look for it, and that being present, and what both Jamie and Dacre were saying about just the being together around food as well. Commensality, that's the word. If you want another word to take away, commensality is what we do when we get together around food. We share it, we enjoy it, we talk, we laugh. That's commensality. We've all missed it, and I think we should all kind of embrace it now that we can do it again.
There we go. Thank you so much, Vincent. A lovely note to end on. And I think I'll also say, I mean, of course, the Festival of Thrift, we're the National Festival of Sustainable Living. So it kind of almost goes without saying that growing, cooking, naturally seasonal food isn't just great for our mental health, it's great for our planet too. So yeah, very much a win-win situation. So thank you. Thanks to our amazing speakers. I've loved listening to your talk. It's made me feel very joyous. And thanks to our audience too. Bear in mind that this talk will be made available on YouTube afterwards. So if you want to tune in again and catch up on some bits you missed, you can. Our next Festival of Thrift talk will focus on fashion. So if you've got a great idea or someone you think you'd like to invite to take part, do get in touch via the Festival of Thrift website. And not only that, there's a complimentary in both spellings of the word, Fix It Cafe session coming soon. So do keep an eye on the festival website for details of that. And if you haven't already, please do join our mailing list. Thank you again. Have a lovely afternoon. From all of us, goodbye.